knows. Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, I think we're getting most everybody in here. Let's just give it a moment more. Okay, great. Folks are going to be joining as we go, I can see, but it's 5:34, so why don't we get going? All right, so welcome everyone. My name is David Plum, and my role here tonight at this meeting is to facilitate and moderate. It's great to see a number of folks who I recognize here on the screen and other folks who I've never met through this process with the Climate Council and Climate Action Vermont. We're here today because in Vermont, there is something called the Vermont Climate Council that was created by the legislature, and it's in charge every 4 years of updating the state's climate action plan. And it's been working diligently over the last year or so on an update of the initial plan that came out about 4 years ago. And before it finishes that update, it really wants to hear from Vermonters and test ideas that are under debate and discussion. And so we are starting now, today, and we'll be doing this over the next couple weeks, a series of meetings, online and in person, to really talk very specifically about the kinds of ideas that are under discussion for the update of Vermont's climate action plan. I'm here today with a number of folks, staff folks from the Climate Action Office and from my team at Consensus Building Institute. As we get going, I think I'm going to do a quick shout out to them. If you are part of the staff team, whether it's Climate Action Office or CBI, my team, if you want to just make some noise or say hi or just come online. I see Jane Lazorchak, Sophie Veltrop, Indra Archaya, Liz Amler, Charlotte Goodman, Kashka, Orlo are all here to be helpful today, and thanks everyone. We may actually have some folks from the Vermont Climate Council, and I'm just scanning the list. If you are here from the Vermont Climate Council, could you do some emoji thing or say hi and come off mute for 1 second if you're a member of the Vermont Climate Council, just to say hi to this evening? I'm just scanning the list, see who's here.
Hi, David, Johanna Miller, Joey.
Hey, Joey. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hi, everybody. Jared Duval, also a member of the Climate Council. Nice to be with you all.
Thanks, Jared. Glad you're here. Anybody else from the council? Okay, great.
David, I'm also here.
Oh, Leslie Ann, great to see you.
Likewise.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have some folks from the council here. I'm looking at my participant list. We have about 100 participants, including all of us. So thanks everyone for coming out. We are going to try to make tonight a discussion. It's hard with 100 people online. We're going to use technology to help us do that. And we're going to start that right now and actually test some of that technology, see how it feels. Some of you maybe in meetings have used something called Menti. It's like a little polling feature. We're going to be using Menti tonight. And I'll ask Charlotte actually to drop in the link. There she goes, right there. See that little Menti link right there? If you click on that, it's going to ask you a question. All right. If you just click right on that link, it's going to ask you a question. And you can see what that question is. I already see some people are answering it. And you can, this is about, hey, is this your first time having a meeting about climate action in Vermont? Or, hey, I'm pretty old hat at this. I'm just taking a moment, and I think if you dropped your share, Jane, I will share my screen with the answers to this. Can folks see that okay? Okay, great. Wow, this is a great distribution. Look at this. Several of you do live and breathe. Many of you understand the basics and been part of the conversation. And we have some relative newbies here too, which is great. So that's great. So now you've got a sense of how the Mentis work, how the Menti thing works. So I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm going to forward the thing. For this one, I'm going to ask you to just answer with a single word if you can. And this is what the question is. Whoops, that didn't work. Let's try that better. What is the first word that comes to mind when I say climate action? Right? I say climate action, you say, and go ahead and enter that right in. Okay, you can see it coming in I'm just going to keep sharing. I say climate action, you say urgent. I say climate action, you say hope. I say climate action, you say collaboration. Let's let this run just for a moment. You can see 30 something of you have done it. Feel free, others, type it in. Energy, needed.
And David, there are some responses even on the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you.
for
Yeah,
folks who are not able to answer.
absolutely. So if you're having a hard time with the Menti, the chat's a great way to drop some words in there. Right. So I can see what's going on, right? Insufficient, essential, greenwashing, potentially. Yes. Okay. Great. So this is great. So if you're having a hard time with a Menti, just let us know, and using the chat is a nice way to do that. Okay. So this is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to do a couple things. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with a changing climate in Vermont. We're going to talk a little bit about climate action, meaning the actions that have been going on since the initial climate action plan about 4 years ago. But we're going to spend most of our meeting, just about 50 minutes, a better part of an hour, reacting to draft priority actions that the Climate Council has been putting together. Okay, so we're going to do those three things, talking about what's going on in Vermont with the changing climate, the kinds of actions that have already been ongoing, and then we're going to spend most of our time reacting to those draft priority actions that the council's been debating. Okay, and for that third one, we're going to spend part of that time in some smaller groups so we can actually discuss it a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this. Thank you all for putting all these words in here. It's really helpful to do that. And we'll use technology because we are such a big crowd. We're 113 right now, so it's hard for everyone to jump in all the time. All right. So Jane Lazorchak is going to give a few slides in just a moment that speaks about how the state of Vermont is seeing climate impacting the state. But before she does, I think we're going to do one more round on the Menti, and I promise we're not going to do this every second, but we're just front loading a little bit. And the next Menti we want to do is how are you experiencing a changing climate? And I don't have, let's see, I might even share my screen on this. Charlotte, could you drop that Menti link back in the chat? And I will share my screen again. Exactly. Short phrases work really well in this format. How are you experiencing a changing climate in Vermont? Yep. So I'm seeing the same things you're seeing, right? We have a lot of the flooding issues, the roads, the rainfall, the worry, potential on loss of snow and winter sports. We got ticks and issues. I'll keep scrolling here as it comes. Shorter winters, right. Hot summers, wildfire smoke. Right, in just a sec, I'm going to group these up in some common themes. Fewer pollinators, business failure. Okay, so when I hit the space bar here, we're going to get a little bit of a grouping here. Just give me 1 second and it'll pop up. Again, just trying to use a little bit of technology to help us see what you're saying. Weather changes are a big theme here. Flooding connected to weather changes are a big theme. Hot summers, economic costs, ticks, and some other responses, right? This one's about inequities and rural issues. Okay, so these are the kinds of things you all are feeling. I'm going to turn it over to Jane now, who heads up the Climate Action Office for the state of Vermont at the Agency of Natural Resources, and let her walk through a couple slides about what the state is seeing in terms of the big picture of climate change. We're going to do this in just about 5 minutes. So Jane, I'm going to stop sharing and over to you.
So much, David. And thanks to everybody for coming in tonight to learn with us. Let me reshare my screen and get back to the right slide. There we go. So, before we move into what the state's been doing and the work in particular with the Climate Council tonight to understand and think about recommendations, we thought it was important just to take a few minutes and really understand how how climate change is impacting Vermont. Really understand both from how we are feeling it as Vermonters, as well as how we're seeing it add up in numbers. Vermont is the 7th highest ranked state in the country for the number of federally declared disasters across the whole United States. That's driven a lot by what you see on the picture on the right, flooding, but that's not the only climate hazard facing Vermont. There's also federally declared disasters around ice storms. And then there's also those chronic hazards that are slow creepers, like you were all talking about when we're thinking about increasing temperature, ticks, and all the things that come with that. We're also the 4th highest per capita disaster for assistance in all of those states. So that per capita brings us up even higher. And when you look at it by county, Vermont has 4 of the top 10 counties in the United States with the sheer number. This is not by per capita or anything, just sheer number of disasters, with Washington County at the top of that list. Not a list that you want to be top of. In addition, climate change is impacting Vermont across all sectors. As we mentioned, it's both a slow creeper with respect to how we feel it, with respect to heat and temperature, and then with real impacts around climate hazards that are dramatic from flooding events and other traumatic climate experiences. So we feel that through the increased precipitation, warmer winters, drought, hotter summers. And then actually, it's such a privilege to have Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux with us tonight, who is our state climatologist. She serves on the Vermont Climate Council, and she's been working both in the initial climate action plan and this time around to update what you see here, this graph on the left, that really tries to look at detailed scientific analysis to understand what we can, with certainty, think about those the Vermont climate projections and the hazard risks associated with that when we look out from 2020 all the way to 2050. So those anecdotal, that feeling that we're having about more flooding is not really just a feeling. It's bearing out in scientific data with heavy precipitation, greater annual precipitation, that falling in more intense events. But that's not to be forgotten that climate change is really about extremes in many cases. And 2 summers ago, the summer of 2023, when we had some of our worst flooding, that was predated earlier that spring with our earliest drought ever on record due to intensive heat. So these are really extremes, and it's really something that we're starting to really bear out in data and understand what those economic impacts are to things like on the preceding picture, the ski industry, farming, and other sectors that are really important to the quality of life in Vermont. I feel like I get to give shout outs to all of our climate counselors on the call today, but this slide is also accompanied by data that Jared Duvall's organization, Energy Action Network, puts together for us, starting to think about the costs of the economics of where we get our fossil fuels from, the fossil fuels that are directly linked to the climate impacts that we're talking about on the preceding slides. And Vermont spends just about $2 billion annually on fossil fuels, with 75% of that money leaving the state. What this means for Vermont as we think about decarbonization and a transition is an opportunity to transition to a much cleaner energy future that relies on both renewable and carbon-free electricity in Vermont. And I am not standing up here saying that electricity is not without its own problems. And I fervently believe that conservation is front of mind and should be our first solution. But we do have an opportunity to both reinvest in our economy and make better energy choices as we think about how we face the impacts and deal with climate change. Climate impacts are not felt equally. In addition, we know that social resilience and community resilience is really important on communities as they bounce back from extreme events like flooding and heat. And Vermonters who live on lower incomes are less able to bounce back because of that social safety net, as well as the financial impacts that climate change hazards bring. This is really felt acutely by this quote that we have from an unhoused Vermonter. And rather than reading it, I might just sit with it for a minute and let you all read it just to feel the impact of it. We've been trying really hard through this engagement and other engagement to really think about how we bring these voices into the conversation to ensure that as we think about what an equitable transition looks like, these voices are carried through in helping us think not on the back end, but on the front end about how we craft solutions and recommendations that are going to lift us all up as we transition away from fossil fuels and think about a more resilient future. So before I get to talk about some of the things that the state has been doing in service of our recommendations tonight, I want to pause here and just let David ask you a few questions to bring you all back into the conversation.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah. And I'll turn the chat back on in a sec. Before I do, I just want to note, and tonight we will be talking with each other, right? We're going to break into some smaller groups, have some conversation. At the very end, we'll have some opportunity here in the plenary space for some conversation. This is a space for respectful conversation and dialogue. I'll put out a slide in just a moment that talks about sort of 3 ground rules that I hope we can respect in this meeting, right? One is to share the floor and make sure all of us will get a chance to weigh in. The second one is be respectful, and that just means, you know, show folks the respect you want them to show you. So we don't need to have attacks on each other. Let's just focus on our opinions. I've seen some things in the chat that really didn't meet that guideline, so I'll just note that and say I hope folks that going forward we're able to express views that aren't directed at each other or somehow attacking each other. Also, stay on topic, folks. That'll be my other one, the ground rules tonight. So with that, we'll try this. I'll open up the chat. One of the things we want to shift to right now is what are you doing, right? What's been helpful in your communities or in your households on these 2 kinds of climate action? One is about being prepared and resilient, right, in the face of the kinds of floods that Vermont has seen and other types of things that are related to a changing climate. The other is how are you trying to save money by switching up your home heating, which can also reduce climate pollution? How are you trying to figure out how to potentially save money and reduce pollution in the way you get around and transportation? What are you all doing? I'm curious. I'm going to open up the chat and let you all drop some ideas in there. Again, I plead for the respectful interaction. And I will say, folks, if we're not able to do that kind of respectful interaction in the chat or verbally, I will ask folks to leave the meeting, because that is kind of the idea of us being here together. Okay, so think about it for a second. What has been something that's been helpful for you or your community to address climate hazards, and any actions you're doing in your house or in your community to reduce heating costs, which also had the benefit of reducing emissions? So I think you all should be able to drop some stuff in there. Let me see that. Participants can chat with everyone. Okay. There we go. Yep. Right, so window inserts. Got a wood pellet stove, all electric house, bigger culverts, right? Bigger culverts are surprisingly important. Yeah. Right. Walkable community. Right. And it's tough to get off your current heat systems, right? And this is going to lead into some of the recommendations coming out of the Climate Council too. Great. Okay. All right, folks. So you can see what I'm seeing in there, right? Folks are doing things. They're insulating their houses. They're putting in windsurts, right? You're trying to figure out the kind of heating system you want. You're seeing your towns take steps like bigger culverts to deal with flooding. Great. Okay. So Jane, back to you. We were hopeful you could give a quick overview of the kinds of things that have been happening since the last time Vermont's Climate Council came up with an action plan.
David, before doing that, I think I'm just going to share the basis for the foundational law that Vermont has that sort of guides this work and puts forward the Vermont Climate Council and the timeline that we're on. So I want to acknowledge that in 2020, Vermont passed the Global Warming Solutions Act. The Global Warming Solutions Act took what were goals on the books to cut our climate pollution and made those statutory mandates. That first one came as of January 1st of this past year, 2025, to cut our climate pollution about 26% below 2005 levels, and a much harder with respect to intervention, recommendations, and thoughts target coming in 2030 to cut our pollution roughly in half, or equal to what the global scientific community has said is needed to keep climate change from being an irreversible harm to Earth. And so the GWSA went beyond those emissions reductions or climate pollution reduction measures and really spoke to several objectives that also speak to how we invest in our natural and working lands for both resilience and sequestration and storage. Think about the built environment as well as how we foster and sequester carbon and storage, and really set an ambitious pathway for us to work collaboratively as a state between state government and the Vermont Climate Council, which was put forward in the law as an independent body combined of administration officials and legislative appointments. And the charge sits with the Climate Council to actually write the climate action plan. It is not a government plan. It is the Climate Council plan that looks to how to set the programs, recommendations, policy measures needed to meet the objectives of the GWSA. That initial plan was adopted in December of 2021. I'm going to speak just on a few slides about some of the policies and measures the state and the legislature and others have been taking over the last few years to move that forward. And then the GWSA acknowledged that that plan would be updated every 4 years. It was intended to be a living document that we would engage with Vermonters around and continue to think about the measures and policies needed to move forward with climate action in Vermont. So this is what we're working towards right now. And the engagement we're doing with all of you is this critical step right now as the Climate Council is thinking about what those priority recommendations are that David will introduce you to shortly and we'll talk about in breakout groups. So I'm going to really bucket our comments on implementation into 3 areas. I'm going to think about what we've done with respect to building resilience and adapting to climate change, both in the natural environment and the built environment, and then speak to some critical measures around cutting climate pollution on the next slide. So when we think about building resilience and adaptation, we really think about it in 2 main buckets. How do we invest in and think about our ecosystems, our natural and working lands, forestry, agriculture, our large-scale forest blocks for all the benefits they provide, both with respect to the sequestration and storage, the co-benefits of all the enjoyment we get out of those lands, the importance of them just for being, and then the protections they provide downstream to many of the our communities. So really, some of the priorities that came out of that first initial climate action plan were how do we conserve those priority ecosystems and mature forests? And Vermont has passed 2 critical changes. Both we passed a 30 by 30 conservation bill that looks at how we prioritize those lands from a biodiversity portion to protect those lands, and really set us on a hard track. We've protected over 1.5 million acres of land in Vermont, but we have a long way to go to reach 30% of Vermont's landscape to meet that 30 by 30 goal, and then 50 by 50 by 2050. And the state is hard at work with partners and Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to put forward a plan and a prioritization and tools needed to do that work. We also made changes to current use program, which many of us call for shorthand, but that's that critical tax offset forest land and farmers get for managing their land for forests or for agriculture. So if you own more than 24 acres of forest land, you can enroll it in current use and pay a reduced tax rate. And I may have gotten that acreage right, but it's roughly that acreage. And what we had in that program, we often look to use that program to meet multiple objectives. So we want to see those forests working and providing the benefits of working land, but we also know they're important for old forests. And so now you can enroll components of your land as old forest and not have to cut them in current use, which provides those multiple benefits. We also are thinking about climate smart development. So how do we invest in concentrated development to both promote growth, provide opportunities for walkable communities, and allow us to protect the surrounding landscape? And Vermont has passed the Flood Safety Act last year, which thinks about statewide flood corridor bylaws to limit and restrict development along floodways and rivers. This was a direct response. Many communities were doing this individually, and the state had been providing technical assistance town by town. But now we have the opportunity to do that statewide to really protect people from harm and also stop having to pay out and think about what that cost is to the impact from flooding long term. And then we also, Vermont has critical land use law, Act 250. It regulates any development over 5 lots or 10 lots if you have subdivision regs. And we really are moving to think about a tiered system in Act 250 to incentivize development where we want, but minimize it in those critical large blocks outside of downtown. So those were some significant bills. And then reducing climate pollution. We had to start with touting our horns. We have a friendly competition with Maine, and David is in Maine, where Vermont actually gets to claim the most heat pump installations per capita in New England, even though Maine is ahead of us on the pure number. We like to go back and forth and compete, but we should be proud that we are working to transition folks to cleaner home heating systems. Vermont's climate pollution, our second largest sector, is how we heat our homes and commercial and industrial buildings. So this is a critical component. We also are thinking about how people move around. And while we know we'll hear from you tonight about the importance of providing multimodal and different kinds of public transit, we also are thinking about how we move folks to electric vehicles. And Vermont has more than 17,000 electric vehicles registered. That's just over 3% of registered vehicles in Vermont. And we're thinking about how we further incentivize that work and help people make that upfront investment, knowing that the vehicles are cheaper in the long run to own. And then we've weatherized approximately 41,000 homes in Vermont. This really gets at that upfront conservation mindset. We don't want people to make the investment of switching to heat pumps only. We want them first to think about how to make their homes more healthy, safe, and efficient through weatherization. And we have scaled up to doubling over the last few years of the number of homes we can do to 4,000 a year. That's really, I want to use this moment just to reflect on, that's really been an opportunity through significant federal funding. Much of that funding for weatherization has come through federal programs over the last few years, and that is something front of mind for all of us with federal funding rollbacks and how we don't hit a cliff for all the great work we've done to scale up. So we really need to be thinking not only about what those measures are, but how we finance those long term. And before I turn it back to you all to think about your role and thinking about recommendations, I just want to leave you with this picture that there is still so much more to do. Vermont, one of our Climate Council members on the call tonight likes to say this, and it's so true. We have both a moral and a statutory obligation to reduce our emissions. And as I mentioned, that first target is coming, well, it came and passed January 1st of this year. And the statutory backstop to that target is our greenhouse gas inventory, which lags a few years behind the actual calendar year. But our early projections show that we did not make that target. We were 1% roughly over. So doing good, but not enough. Thinking about whether or not it's even possible at this point to meet that 2030 target. But as we have that front of mind, we need to be thinking about how much we can continue to push on driving emission reductions down in line with the law. And understanding where our emissions come from, which for us in Vermont are first and foremost our transportation sector, the way we heat our homes, and then our agricultural sector, unfortunately, which is a hard one. So with that in mind, I want to leave you with that we've made a lot of progress, but there's a lot of opportunity, and we're really grateful that you're all here tonight to think about what those recommendations are, and want to acknowledge that your voices in this process are not a one and done. We've been working really closely with the public over the last year to stand up and start to think about the climate action plan a year ago. We held some kickoff meetings to invite folks into the process and make you all aware that all of the meetings of the Climate Council are public and posted. And then this fall, as the subcommittees, which are the technical bodies of the Climate Council that really concentrate where the work happens, we had some really focused conversations with Vermonters around where they thought the greatest opportunity was for recommendations. The council's been working really hard this winter to draft those recommendations in concert with the information they got from the subcommittees. And we're at this place now where we want to hear from you about the kind of scale and opportunity, if we're getting it right, and what you think where the greatest opportunities are for action. So with that, we hope to come back out and put out a complete draft of the plan later this spring and adopt it by July 1st. So this is a really critical time. I'm really happy that you're all here and looking forward to hearing about what you think the opportunities are for climate action and how they translate to the recommendations you'll hear about tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, Jane. And if you click one more time, yeah, you'll see that one of the other kinds of engagements that's happened is much more targeted. I
shot through it, sorry.
Yeah, with folks who typically don't get involved in these kinds of policy processes. And so Kashka and Indra and others and I and Sophie have been out speaking with a whole range of Vermonters. Now, so here's the slide that shows the 4 buckets of draft priority actions, okay? Now, these roughly correspond to the kinds of work that Jane just mentioned in the subcommittees of the council. In the top left-hand corner and the blue corner, these are all the measures that relate to how do we reduce climate pollution. And I'll take a look at those in just a moment, some of those. There's about how we get around, the electricity supply and the buildings and thermal, right? Over to the, or down from that in the green, rural resilience and adaptation. Those are a set of draft priority actions about how do communities prepare more effectively and be more resilient in the face of climate hazards. Okay, so we'll look at a few of those and you get a sense of what those are looking like. In the top right-hand corner are what we call our cross-cutting issues that you can see just in their nature sort of cut across different things. Workforce development. So we have the workforce available in Vermont to do the clean energy projects and other things we need to do. Education. So how are Vermonters learning and being educated about these issues? And then what we refer to often is compact settlement, but some people just call it walkable, livable communities. Whereas how do our settlement patterns affect the way the state emits carbon and also is ready for the kinds of climate hazards that may come. Agriculture and ecosystems in the bottom right-hand corner there, those are issues that are deeply related to the land, right? And how do farmers and foresters and other land caretakers take steps that are supportive of climate goals and supportive of agriculture and the history of agriculture and forestry and land conservation in Vermont. Okay, now what I would like to do is just give you a little peek into them before we go into breakouts and we spend a little bit of time reading these. So Jane, if you drop your slides, I'm going to show my slides. So all of this information is online, folks, and I'm going to show you the website first. And this is the climatechange.vermont.gov website. And if you get to the Get Involved place here, Learn and Act, and you'll find your way over to here. And this is the Climate Action Plan update. Here are the priority draft actions. You can just click through, I already have, and you get this, okay? And it's just a long PDF. Now, the reason these are called draft is because they really are draft, right? The council continues to debate them, right? Individual councilors have a range of views on them, right? These are not yet consensus recommendations coming out of the council. These are being debated in real time. And it's one of the exciting things about being here with you all and the work we're going to do this month is the council really does want input. All right. Now, let me just show you a handful so you get a flavor of what's in here. And then I'm going to let you do your own reading as well. All right. All right. So the first one, so this is a bunch that relate to the emissions reductions, what's called cross-sector mitigation, but that's essentially meaning the reducing climate pollution. And the first one is super meaty, right? And has a lot of jargon and technical words in here. And so we apologize right now about that. And one of the things that can be helpful in public meetings like this is if you say, honestly, the way this is written, it's very hard to understand what we're doing here. That's good feedback. And then the council can take some steps to do some more plain language versions of this. This is one of the major recommendations and draft priority actions coming out of this emissions reductions bucket, both covering transportation and buildings in the thermal sector, which is how we heat our homes and our office space, et cetera. And what this says, it says, join a cap and invest program, right? Such as the one that's in New York or in process of being stood up in New York, or one that's happening in California, of which Quebec is also a part of right now, called the Western Climate Initiative, right? And what these things do, right, cap and invest, it's a way of gradually reducing emissions and creating the opportunity to do that in an efficient way through the allocation of emissions credits. This requires some, study to really dig into it. And I think we can talk a little bit about it today. There's been a couple sessions that the council has done that are recorded, and I'd welcome anybody who's curious to go back and listen to a session on February, I'll get the dates wrong, February 10th and March 18th-ish. Both of those sessions are worth reading. So this is some detail about this, and basically it's saying, if we're going to do this, the next steps are these kinds of things, right? That the Agency of Natural Resources needs to develop a framework for reporting, and there needs to be some work done to understand how this is affordable for the most vulnerable in Vermont. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that are in this, and there's a lot of detail in this one. Many of these are not quite as detailed. Let me show you a couple other ones. For instance, in transportation, here's a whole bunch of things around how do we support vehicles that emit less pollution, right? How do we get consistent funding for EV incentives and the like, and consistent funding for the charging network that Vermont's going to need? This one is one that is it comes up frequently in all the public engagement we do. This is all about the public, active, and shared transportation Vermont needs to invest in to help people get around in an efficient way, for folks not to have to always get in their own cars. There's a lot going on in Vermont on this and more that needs to be done. So this is trying to incentivize Vermont to do more. I'm going to jump ahead and show you a few more. I'm just going to scroll down here for a second. Look at all these different ones. I'm not going to go into them. I'm going to jump down to the education. So this is the kind of thing that are in the education and the cross-cutting issues, right? Build off existing resources and programs to create an open source, accessible, and interdisciplinary climate change curriculum for Vermont educators, right? That's a specific recommendation coming out of the cross-cutting group, right? Also, related to that, amend the education quality standards to incorporate environmental and climate change education at all grade levels, right? These are the kinds of things that you'll find when you dig into these recommendations a little bit. Let me jump ahead just one more. There's workforce ones, right? There's the rural resilience ones. There's ag and eco, right? There's a number of things. Compact settlement. How do we get folks living in village centers, right? You need to get the right transportation alternatives to make that happen. Let me just show one more, and then we do need to advance. Hang on just a second. I'm rolling forward here into ag and ecosystem, excuse me, the rural resilience and adaptation. Here's one I'll show you. Secure sustainable long-term funding to expand and maintain a permanent flood resilience community fund, right? For the design and implementation of local and regional climate change adaptation projects and community resilience, right? These are the kinds of things that are in here, all right? And you can click through and do your own perusing. All right, so now let's talk about what's going to happen. And Jane, could you throw your slides back up real quick? You're almost there, but not quite there. There they go. Okay. We're gonna split up into 6 breakout rooms right now. And Jane will take one, Sophie will be in one, Indra will be in one, Liz will be in one, and Kashka will be in one, and I'll do one. Charlotte's gonna stay behind and make sure nobody gets lost. All right, we're gonna go on these 2 questions when we get in there, right? Which of these draft actions in that list that we're just looking at is most compelling? What really lights a fire for you? Like, what is really working among these draft actions? Pick 1 or 2. What's really exciting? So that's one thing to think about as you read through. Great, thanks, Indra. Second, what's some urgent feedback that the council needs as it goes into this next phase of finalizing and trying to build some consensus around this, right? What's the urgent feedback you have? Maybe there's something you don't see in this list that is a higher priority than what you do see, right? That could be an interesting piece of feedback. So those are the 2 questions we're going to do. When we break in, first we're going to sit and literally just read in silence for about 3 to 5 minutes, and we'll let you scroll through that long PDF. You won't be able to read it all, but scroll down. Maybe you're interested in the ag and ecosystem stuff, right? Scroll down to there and take a peek. So we'll sit in silence for 3 to 5 minutes, right? Then we'll jump into these 2 questions. We'll do a little bit in the chat. We'll do a little bit, raise your hand and speak. Could you go to the next slide, Jane? Here are my discussion guidelines. All right. This is a public meeting, right? And for public meetings to work, these are the kinds of things that help them work, right? Share the floor, right? There's going to be a number of us talking. You know, keep your comment to a minute or 2 max, right? There's a lot of folks who probably want to weigh in. Respect different views, right? It's very okay to have different views on these issues. Just show the respect you'd want someone to show of you, all right? So which means, like, don't attack somebody else for their view. Just say, hey, I have a different view on this. Stay on topic. Let's stick to what we're talking about tonight and not go off on some tangent. All right, so in the breakout session, we're going to do about 3 to 5 minutes of reading time. Then we're going to do about 15 minutes of discussion time, and then we'll come back. And yeah, and it might be tightened up a little bit because we're running a little bit late. But let's say 3 to 5 minutes of reading time and 12 to 15 minutes of discussion time. And Charlotte will give us some warnings when we'll get pulled back in here. All right. So I think with that, we're ready to get into the breakouts. And so you may need to click accept when you get a breakout request, and that'll send you off into the breakout. We'll be there for 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, and we'll see you back here in the main room. Thanks, everyone. Apologies if someone was mid-sentence when you got pulled back into the main room. It's kind of like you know, Charlotte's got a lot of power in those moments. All right. So I hope folks had interesting conversations. We did. I don't know how much our folks often use the chat for their comments, but I'm going to ask a favor of folks, which is I actually would love for you to type in just quickly using the Menti some of the highlights of what you just spoke about. Those same two questions of what's most compelling among those draft actions and what is the urgent feedback. If we use the Menti, then we can consolidate it quickly and look at it across the different breakout rooms. Charlotte just dropped the link again in the chat, and I'll open this up so we can do this. But let's start out with the compelling. We'll just do this briefly, and then I'm going to let people raise hands and any final comments folks want to make when we're all together here. But if you are able to just one more time use those thumbs or your keyboard and just give us a quick shout out across the different groups, right? There you go. I see folks doing it. I'll start sharing my screen with results. It's really helpful, even if you drop something in the chat previously, drop it in one more time over here. Or maybe you were motivated by the conversation you heard, you've changed your mind a little bit, who knows? Okay, so most compelling. You can see what's coming up. Cap and invest, cap and invest, cap and invest. Okay, so we got some enthusiasm around that. Reducing emissions, right? Transportation infrastructure, compact settlement, more transportation stuff. Resilience planning, right? Low-income weatherization. Again, I'm going to ask you in just a moment the most critical feedback or crucial feedback you have for the council. For now, I'm interested, what is truly interesting about what you read that you want to make sure folks know that you like? Building weatherization. Let's keep it friendly, folks. Systemic changes, VTrans, public transit, weatherization. Okay, great. Just before we switch to the next question, let's see if our friends in the world of AI do a good job of summarizing this up for us. Transportation infrastructure, reduce emissions, weatherization, cap and invest. All right. Those are resilience planning, other stuff, right? Okay. These are big ones, right? They came out. Okay, folks, let's go to the next one real quick. I think this is the last thing I will have you type in, and then I promise no more mentees. Here we go. Urgent feedback. This is your chance. You've got some counselors in the room right now, and we are going to be sending this input to them and summarizing it. What do they need to hear? Urgent feedback to make this stuff better. And then I'll get to Rod's hand in just a second. Great. You can see what I'm seeing. Right? So there's some stuff, some saying like, let's align with the legally binding stuff, the GWSA, follow the law. We have other people saying, hey, let's stop mandating all this. Can we do this without mandates? Need to hear from the people who aren't on these calls somehow. Absolutely. Yep. We are trying to do exactly the same thing. Keep it simple. Be bold. Accessibility. Where's solar and wind? Yep. Okay. Let me see if our friends at AI can be helpful here. logging issues, grow food. Okay, let's see what we got here. Just take a moment. If you're still typing, don't worry, it'll come in. And then I'll go to hands. Thank you, Rod, for being patient. Okay, we've got some stuff around renewable energy. We've got funding concerns. We've got legal compliance. We've got simplicity. Okay. We've got worker protection. We've got other things, being bold. Okay, great. All right, so you've seen what you're saying. We're going to synthesize this and summarize it and bring up these voices up to the council along with everything else we hear in these meetings. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to go to hands. You can do what Rod did, which is raise your hand in Zoom. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It should say raise hand. Rod, go ahead. And remember those discussion guidelines I showed earlier on.
Well, I just was, I've been actually typing in my hand. I wasn't really raising my hand. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay. No
It
worries.
looked like I was, but I wasn't.
Okay. Okay. Great. So this is a chance. Is there anything you didn't see come up that you think is important to share now? Feedback, other things that would help the council be wise in its decision making. Shivani, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was very surprised that you didn't address logging on public lands. And I can say again what I said before. I come from Germany. We have 30% of our forests in preservation, not conservation. That means no logging, absolute biodiversity. And I don't see that here in Vermont. And I'm really shocked at this new proposal that's coming down in the government to log public lands, send all this lumber to Canada. Nothing is being gained by that by the state. And there's too much management of these wild, incredibly beautiful lands. I live on the Worcester Range, which is a wildlife corridor from White Rock to Worcester. And there's logging planned right behind our houses. We had our whole driveway washed out in the flood this summer, like on 23 summer. And that is because some of the trees are so young that they can't really hold down the earth, and still they want to keep on logging more. So I really would encourage everyone to look at Bill H 276. Representative Amy Sheldon introduced it in the House a couple of days ago. It's the Vermont Wildlife and Wildlands Act, which would keep thousands of acres in preservation. Please vote for it, because if we don't have trees, your cars really don't matter. We need trees to breathe, and we need old trees as well. And so I stand for the trees. I speak for the trees. Please look into preserving, not conserving, because the forests can take care of themselves. The newest forestry in Europe and Germany is coming out that it basically says wildlife can regenerate itself. It does not need management or profit-oriented management. So I think I'm a little sad. I'm a scientist, I'm an anthropologist, at some of the greenwashing that goes on, even in the Agency of Natural Resources, though I love the way that sounds, and I love all of you doing good work, and I know there are different perspectives, but I stand for the trees. Please, I'm a grandmother. I want air to breathe. Leave the trees standing. Thank you.
Thanks, Shivani. Thanks for those comments. Appreciate it. Michael?
Yeah, so I agree with the folks that say that we shouldn't be burning trees, wood to generate electricity. Burlington Electric Department had proposed a capturing the waste heat from McNeil and using it to heat buildings downtown. That makes it better. I think to generate heat, it's almost impossible to do it in a huge way without burning things. But if we're generating electricity by burning wood, and that's the only thing we're doing, it's very inefficient, and we should shut that down. But capturing the waste heat and using it to heat buildings and homes, that would make it better.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Folks, I'm going to ask folks to take a deep breath in the chat, and maybe we'll just listen to each other for a little bit. Richard?
Thank you. I'm a board member of Vermont Interfaith Power and Light, and we want to remind the council that everything that's done has really got to be focused on its impact on low income and marginalized people. These are the people who are suffering the most from climate change, from the economic disruptions that occur when the disasters occur. And so please think about it from the grassroots up.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate the comment. Yeah. Burton?
Yeah, hi. In my breakout room, I came out in support for weatherization of homes. And I personally experienced in my previous home, I moved in and it was a non-insulated old Victorian home. And by the time I moved out, it had weatherized and there was insulation. And I could no longer feel the winter in my bones. And there are so many solutions that, one, reduce climate emissions, two, have other benefits, and also are just like a quality of life improvement. So a lot of times when people think about like mitigating climate change, they think about like more administrative bans and other things that are like things you can't do. But so many of these solutions actually improve your life and your community. And so if we can find solutions that are just like, they do what we want, which is reduce emissions or make communities more resilient, but just make sure that everyone's aware, like actually we're improving your lives through this, not just existentially, but like day to day. That's like something that could really help with buy-in from community members, including skeptical people. Maybe they're not on board with, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but they are on board with like free scooters in downtown Burlington or something. You know what I mean? So just finding solutions that not just do what we want, but also make people's lives better in tangible ways.
Thanks, Burton. I really appreciate those comments. All right, we're getting a couple hands. Let's take these three, and then I'm going to cut it off because we're going to need to finish up tonight. There are many ways to get your voice heard through this process, and we'll talk about that when we finish up. John, you're up next. John Brabert.
That was inadvertent. Sorry about that.
You're good.
No comment. Thank you.
Okay. Kathy.
Wanted to say something about landlords and getting landlords to back this. Our experience in window dressers is it's very hard to get landlords to invest, especially if the people that are renting are paying the heating costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad you brought that up. Thanks for that comment. Stephen?
Hi, thanks. And thanks for doing this. Look forward to seeing you in person on some of these. The one thing that I want to bring up is that a lot of times we look to paying for things through fuel costs or electricity bills. And I think that's a real mistake. I think that's inherently very regressive. And it creates a lot of difficulties. I think that it's really important to figure out how to generate funding to make some of these changes through, things like, the general fund income tax or bonding or something that shifts the cost around. So starts to put more of the burden on people who have more funds to put into these kinds of things. And these things always come up as hurdles, but we have to figure out a way to change that tax structure so that the rich pay more to do this instead of just constantly being the ones that get tax breaks. And that's been the story for many years, and it's going to get worse. I think we all know that. So we have to find a way to shift that funding stream. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate the comment. All right, folks, we're going to finish up tonight because it is, dinner time in just a moment here. Jane, if you could share your screen again. I really appreciate folks' comments in all forms, whether it's the Menti, the chat, or, Jane's going to say a little bit about next steps, and then we'll finish up. We'll make sure that everybody knows about the different ways you can stay engaged through this process. So Jane, back over to you.
David. Sophie Veltrop, who handles community engagement and communications in the Climate Action Office, has been diligently, along with Charlotte from CBI, dropping in the chat ways to provide feedback. But the next slide will have that, and I imagine we'll be following up with you all too with further opportunities to direct you to. We want to acknowledge that this month of April is a very intentional month for us to receive direct feedback from all of you. Tonight, you are the recipients of our first kickoff public engagement meeting. We have 7 in-person meetings scheduled starting next Monday in Hardwick. You can find those, I believe, online. I imagine those will go in the chat too. And we encourage you to, even though you've joined us tonight online, please, if you have the capacity or opportunity to meet us out in the wild in different towns across Vermont, we'd love to see you in person. And there'll be different ways to engage with us there. But this month, we'll be getting as much feedback as we can on these priority recommendations, both through the engagement and through multiple channels on our website, including written comments. And we'd love to hear from you, whether in raw form or detailed thoughts or recommendations. And there's a public input form that Sophie has put in the chat, I imagine we'll do again. From this sort of concerted effort of public engagement during this across this month, the council is going to convene in May and very intentionally take in and hear about the feedback and comments you all have, and then make adjustments during the month of May to their recommendations. Do they have the actual recommendations right? Are there big buckets of work that aren't represented that we want to now capture? We're going to really be thinking about how those recommendations reflect what we hear from all of you over this next month. In June, we'll make the final revisions and work towards that statutory deadline of July 1st to update the plan. I do want to say that, like the first plan, they tend to be living and breathing documents. So this might feel rushed right now, understanding it might be your first time engaging with it, but the Climate Council continues its work even during periods of this not as intense periods to be thinking about what that ongoing support and climate action is needed. And then we'll come back out to all of you this summer and fall to think about and reflect back to you what those priority recommendations ended up being and how they're being operationalized and moved forward. So please do stay involved. This page is on our website. I imagine Sophie will drop it in the chat. We have an opportunity for written comment. If you're not a person who likes to raise your hand and speak in public meetings, please find ways to submit in writing, email us. There's lots of ways to find alternative ways. We also have a way for you to get text alerts and an e-newsletter to stay informed both of engagement opportunities and then around more broad climate action going forward. Take action, come learn and act, come to other public meetings. There's discrete learning opportunities and our website and calendar shows you that. And all of our Climate Council meetings are open to the public and have opportunities for public comment embedded in them. So please join by going to our calendar and learning more. And we always welcome new faces engaging with us through different channels. So thank you. And that's it. I'm going to turn it back to you, David, to wrap us up and say what's next.
Super. All right. Thanks so much, Jane. I honestly don't have more. I appreciate the comments everyone's made in this meeting. If the technology gods work well, when you sign off tonight, it'll ask you 2 quick questions about sort of how this meeting was. And we're asking you those so we can improve our meetings as we go forward this month and in the future. So if you have a second to answer those 2 quick questions, that would be really great. With that, let's close up tonight. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate folks spending time with us. We had a good turnout, and we recognize this is only one way to reach Vermonters, and we are working hard on other ways to reach Vermonters where they're at. And this works for some folks, but it doesn't work for everyone, and we're real clear about that. So thanks, everyone. Very interesting, constructive conversations. We're taking this in. We're sending it up to the council. And stay informed and on those websites. And we'll see you out in some of these towns in Vermont. Take care. Have a good night, everybody.